Good evening, good people. Well, not a lot of good people, but there are a few. Hi there, Michael. Hi there, John. And who knows who else might join us. It says that I have currently 5 viewers, but I only see 2 of them. Doesn't really matter. Today's stream, I'm going to try to talk a little bit about the thing about narrative, or the truth versus what some people feel the truth is. And obviously, there are several different topics within our current day and age that are really big on narrative, but not so big on truth. So apparently, out of the 5 people that were watching, 2 of them were John. Well, that makes sense. Anyway, the story we're going to go with is, for example, if we look in the Netherlands, we have Saint Nick. Saint Nick has a helper called Zwarte Piet. And now, obviously, because he's black, people complain that he must be a slave. Now, this is bullshit. The story is completely different. But the reality of the story doesn't matter. And the reality of the story, for fuck's sake, it's all made up to begin with. But the story behind Black Pete is that of ending slavery. And the story they now want you to believe is that he's a slave. It's kind of like the story on how global warming causes ice to melt and therefore polar bears dying. The reality of the story is there are more polar bears now than there were 20 or 30 years ago. The truth of the story is that slavery has been abolished in most of the Western world, and it's still active in certain African and Middle Eastern countries. But the narrative is it's all white people's fault. All of these funny examples on how there is a story and a truth. And it seems that, now this is a political thing, I'm sure. It seems that certain political parties love to push the narrative of things because it fits with their narrative, even though it doesn't fit with the truth. Hi there, Richard, and hi there, Real Raven, by the way. And yes, I understand, Real Raven. There is a card game that's called Zwarte Pieten. And if you then give someone the Black Pete card, they lose. Or rather, in the end, they might lose. But that's gaming. So, back to the story at hand. So what happens is that very often we have a reality and we have a narrative. And it's very difficult to break away from this. After all, one of the biggest examples at this point in time is that there is such a thing as hate speech, and hate speech is violence. Okay, but no one ever got damaged by words. Well, your reputation might get damaged, yeah, sure, but it doesn't cause you to bleed or anything like that. And indeed, Richard Bayer, what do I mean that slavery has been abolished? And what are those black people complaining about? In the Western world, black people are complaining about slavery only if they feel that they can get something out of it. This is kind of funny because this is why in America they're actually talking about reparations. I would not know what they would be getting reparations for, to be honest. Because let's be honest, black people in America have it far better than black people that are still in Africa. Never mind that. That's not part of the narrative. The narrative is America had slaves, therefore black people are a victim. But don't get me wrong. Historically speaking, there had been periods of time in America where black people actually did have a bad time. Not only linked to slavery, but not all black people. Because there were also black people in power positions. But that doesn't count because for some reason the black in the example of slavery either identify themselves as victims or, well, as victims. None of them identify themselves with the black people that were in power. Were there a lot of black people in power? No. But they were there. It doesn't fit the narrative. The narrative is we were victims. It's kind of like the narrative of how we was kings. And oh, no, black people, Egypt, black people, oh, we were the pharaohs. Yeah, but the people in Egypt weren't black. They were more like the Greek. But nobody wants to hear that because it doesn't fit the narrative. It's like saying, well, but black people, everything white people did, black people did better. Okay, fair enough. But reality says that's not the case. Doesn't mean that there weren't things that they could do. I mean, let's look at the Zulu uprising in the British history in South Africa. Yeah, they were very effective. But those were the exception to the rule. Doesn't mean that these exceptions don't count. Of course they do. They're a very important part of the history. But somehow they're only important if it pushes a certain narrative. So people won't tell you that the Zulus fought back the British. Obviously not, because it doesn't fit the narrative. The narrative is British slaughtered black people. When black people slaughtered white people or the British, yeah, no, but there's a good reason for that. I'm not saying there's not, but either it's true for both or it's true for neither. The Zwarte Piet situation with Sinterklaas. Either he's a slave, fair enough, or he was a free man, also fair enough. Well, he can't have been a free man. Why can't he have been a free man? Because he's black. So now you're saying he must have been a slave because he's black. Because the story says something else. This is kind of funny because if we look at black people and slavery, etc., 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 in all fairness, it's mostly the left that are very, very racist. Now, they don't like to think of it as racism, but they are. Because they can only see black people as slaves. Because that's the only narrative that fits. Black people in positions of power typically will make things worse for other black people and claim that they are fighting to make things better to stay in those positions of power. It depends a little bit, Richard. If you're talking about black people that like to push the idea of sort of a tribalism, then yeah, you're correct. But there are lots of black people, American history shows this very clearly, that were very much, how do you say, in favor of Western society. And as such, kind of did everything they could to be part of said society. I'm trying to think of what the name was. There was a, how do you call it? Republican governor, I think. He was a black man, but he was very much American. I can't remember now. Sorry. And hi there, Ludacris, by the way. I never really tell the truth. In fact, I am lying to you all right now. That's not true. You're not talking to us, are you? Just another thread. Retread. Sorry, I gotta continue my story. I'm busy too much with what you guys are saying. That's not helping me. So we live in a society where narratives are being pushed and are being forced to be recognized as reality. It's kind of like, almost like it's a new religion of sorts. Okay, so why are certain things real? Well, because the story says so. And people have to believe it, because if they don't believe it, they are deniers. Which is a modern way of saying you have to do what I tell you to. Climate deniers, for example. Oh no, you're a climate denier because you don't believe climate change is real. Okay. But do we have proof that climate change is real? Yes, of course we do. Okay. So what kind of proof do we have? Yeah, there is a problem, because the proof we have is not really there. But it's okay, because if enough people tell you, no, this is the truth, that is what it will be. And haide renovatio. Narrative have always been pushed. It's what people in power do. You're correct. This is also why Voltaire said, if you want to know who rules over you, find out who you are not allowed to criticize. Because you have to follow what they say the truth is. If you don't, that's a problem. It's double, though, that people kind of recognize it and don't want to recognize it at the same time. It's almost as if it doesn't fit. And haide renovatio. What do I mean with it's almost as if it doesn't fit? Well, look at it this way. There is a truth and there is a narrative. Now, for example, is it a good thing to burn fossil fuels? We're talking about fossil fuels. Fossil fuels create CO2. This is a big problem. Here's the funny thing. CO2 isn't the big problem. Should we try to use as little fossil fuels as possible? Well, if there would be an easier way, then yeah, sure. But not because of CO2. Because burning fossil fuels also releases a whole lot of other stuff, like sulfur. Back in the days, they added lead to it to make it better for the cars. Plenty of reasons why we don't want that anymore. But yeah, all of a sudden, the lead is now out of the fuel, which then took care of that one problem. There are other stuffs in the fuel, and we still have certain problems. But instead of addressing those problems, we address the one thing that we can't prove is a problem. Makes you wonder why they don't address stuff like heavy metals. But then again, they can't attack certain heavy metals because, let's be honest, they are needed to make solar panels and wind turbines. And yeah, I mean, if they are indeed that damning, you shouldn't be using them. The other word that you are looking for would be heretic. Yeah, those who do not believe in the narrative are the heretic. It's kind of funny because if you tell these people that they are acting as if they are believers, they get upset because how dare you? This is certainly not the case according to them. Okay, well, it's okay that you think it's not the case, but can you prove any of the things? Well, no, they can't. What's this? Asks Rezo, that German SJW YouTuber who brought down the CDU made a kiss, marry, fuck video and is now being cancelled by his own what? Because heavy metals are... No, that's something else. Did he have suicidal tendencies? What was he thinking? I don't know. Because heavy metals are subject in higher education. If one goes for science classes, science studies, thus people know about the topic and are not uneducated but loud morons. Well, I mean, back to the whole idea of narrative-driven bullshit. If we look, for example, at the environmentalists. brilliant people like the Extinction Rebellion people, who are so full of their own story that they really want to disrupt society. And how do they do that? By trying to prevent public transport from working. But public transport is by far the most environmental friendly way of moving large people. It doesn't work that way. But they will push it that way because it fits their narrative. What's their narrative? Well, their narrative is let's disrupt society. It's not let's make things better for people. Well, surely not. Because if it were to be making things better for people, they would help people. They would try to make sure that trains would run on time, not have massive delays. The narrative that our current society is bad is more important than the reality of the thing. Funny enough, by doing so, they force people more likely to use their own car, so pollute more, than had they not done it. It's the same like certain protests where they lock up cities so that people can't drive from point A to point B. They are standing in created congestions created by these people who do so for the betterment of environment. But by doing so, they are hurting people economically, because if I have to drive my car and I lose 2 hours, that's also 2 hours that I'm not going to get paid for. But in those 2 hours time when I'm stuck in traffic, my engine is running, which consumes fuel, which pollutes the earth, according to, well, the narrative. But that part of the narrative then becomes of less import. It's kind of the same thing with slavery. Oh, the white man is guilty for slavery. Okay, but the white man also ended slavery, if that were true. Yeah, but you only ended slavery after 100 years. Yeah, but slavery has been going on for thousands of years, and the European cultures, they ended it, let's say in 1800, whereas certain countries still allow it. Yeah, but they only allow it because patriarchy or Western society. Yeah, but Western society isn't part of it. If you look at Libya, if you look at Sudan, that has nothing to do with Western society. But the West still is being blamed for it. When BLM tried to block the interstates in Minneapolis with their human chains, the city told drivers that if the people wouldn't get out of the road, drivers were authorized to run protesters over. Well, Richard Beyer, unfortunately, that's because something else that happened a long time ago. I forgot his name. There was a truck driver, and I think it was in LA with the riots. And they were rioting, and there was a bunch of people stopped, and they basically pulled a truck driver out of his truck and killed him. He had nothing to do with these people. He had nothing to do with the whole story. But in the end, he died. And there have been people saying, like, okay, if something like this happens, floor it. Because you do not want to be stuck there. Because no one can come and help you on time. And you might get killed. So this is why I am not only in Minneapolis. I think there were several states in America that also said, you know what, you are free to keep driving. Hi there, Paolo. That's a good one. German government officials recommend saving emails locally, as a hard drive doesn't use as much power as the internet does. Okay. Well, it's true, I guess, in a slightly disturbing way. And I think what Richard is saying is probably more true. Because if you have it stored at a local device, then authorities can easily capture it. So, But look at, for example, the narrative of Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter narrative was black people get killed uh, exponentially by police. Where the reality of the matter is that this is not the case. White people get killed more by the police than black people. Yeah, the story then goes, but there are more white people in America, so obviously it would happen to white people more. Yeah, that's not a good explanation, to be honest, because let's be honest, 50% of violent crime in America is committed by black people. So on average, the police has to deal with violent black criminals as much as they do with violent white criminals. Then you would have thought that the shooting incidents would be roughly the same. They are not, because, well, cops don't want to be called racist for whatever stupid reason. Fair enough. But then that reality, the fact that white people get shot more than black people, becomes so much ignored that it's very difficult to find these informations. If you go look at on the internet, and there are some places where you can find these informations. For example, I think The Guardian used to have a website called The Counted, where they kept track of everyone that was killed by the police. And they stopped doing that. Now, why did they stop doing that? Because it proved the narrative that black people were more likely to be shot by the police than white people. It proved that that was false. So all of a sudden, that became a problem. Okay, so let's then pretend we're not keeping track of it anymore. Or rather, it's not we pretend we're not keeping track. We're no longer keeping track. Why are we no longer keeping track? So that the narrative can prevail. So that people can say, see, black people get shot more. It's a little bit double though. It's the Ice Bear story. It's the global warming story. It's the Black Lives Matter. It's the slavery. It's the reparations. It's men and women are the same story. All these stories kind of come from somewhat the same ideological ground. It all comes from what we now call the regressive left. We don't like this, therefore this needs to stop. We don't like that, therefore that needs to stop. It's rather authoritarian. I don't want you to do this, therefore you are not to do this. Yeah, but it's not illegal. But I still don't want you to. You're not allowed to say certain things because I consider it hate speech. Okay, but what is hateful about telling the truth? You might call it the truth. I don't consider it the truth. Well, for example, take slavery. We have a very good view of what slavery was like in Europe. Why? Because it was all documented. Yes, but we don't want you to tell the truth. We know that less than 500,000 slaves were brought to what we now call the United States of America. Alright, fair enough. But there were more slaves that went from Europe to the Middle East and Africa. Yeah, but we don't care about that. No, obviously not. But why is it being denied? Why is it being ignored? Well, because it doesn't fit the narrative. The narrative is that certain groups of people are victims, and therefore we should feel sorry for them. Certain groups of animals are victims. The environment is changing. Oh, look at the poor animals. Okay, but most animals that died have died in places where the white man isn't. Okay, but it doesn't matter because they still get killed, therefore environment. Hi there, Davey. Haven't seen you around for a while, mate. When the white people get shot by the police, they had it coming. Oh, well, obviously. And black people are always victims. The thing is, though, and I find this very infuriating in a way. If we look at something like Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter had more white supporters than black supporters. But somehow, that was not to be allowed to be known. There were more black people against Black Lives Matter than there were in favor of them. But somehow, that's not part of the narrative. Black Lives Matter got started as not only look at how the police kills us, but also we have to accept trans and gay black people. Black people themselves kind of disagreed with that. This is kind of funny because Black Lives Matter wanted to start working together with other black identitarian groups, and those other black identitarian groups didn't like Black Lives Matter. Why? Well, one of the reasons was because they're pro-gay and pro... how do you call this? LGBT. Let's just call it LGBT. Now, am I against this? No, I don't care. But there were people that were against this. No need to pray. Ah, okay. And yes, BLM was indeed based on feminism, on intersectional feminism for all that. But yeah, there's always something, I guess. So how come these narratives are so strong? Well, these narratives are so strong because people accept them. We really need more people out there saying, okay, you claim this, what do you base this claim on? Well, it's logical, or it's... I don't care if it's logical, I want facts. Well, facts are racist. Yeah, there you have it. While the Chinese are busy tearing the African continent's ecosystem into pieces, killing every animal they can find in almost military fashion, the eco-left still stay silent. Yes, indeed, Renovatio. It's kind of like how they like to complain in Australia and Europe and America on how polluting we are, whilst countries like India and China are being left alone because, well, yeah, they're far more polluting, but who cares? They're not big. And China is already communist, so that's good enough for them. Because this is the downside of it. But it all boils down to an identity politic kind of group that wants to push a certain narrative to gain political sway, to gain political clout. And if they're doing a good enough job, eventually they will, how do you call that, be able to push certain legislation through, certain narratives through, and how dare you disagree. And I see that John has given Davy the spanner. Thank you, John. I didn't even think about that. Though you get a spanner whether you want one or not. Okay. Oh boy. Oh. Now, if we look at something quite... Is this a... Is what a conspiracy, mate? I have no idea. Okay, I have no idea what this is all about, guys. I didn't follow this chat well enough to recognize what's going on. Is this my last stream? I don't think so. I'm just coughing, mate. I'm not dying. Anyway, I'm so totally lost on what I wanted to say. I don't know why. if we look at the lies brought to you by schools, because this is where it all starts. Our children are being taught certain things. We were being taught certain things that have absolutely no basis on reality. And I'm sorry, Michael. I did cough, but I'm not that sick. Not that I know of. I mean, I'll see the doctor on Tuesday, I think. Nah, I'm all right. Story or truth, Michael? Story or truth? John has logged in with two accounts apparently. But if we look at the narratives that kids get taught nowadays at school, socialism is considered a good thing. Why is socialism considered a good thing? Well, because we like socialism. Okay. But that doesn't make it a good thing. But we want it to be a good thing. Again, that's nice, but that doesn't make it a good thing. So how come our schooling system is pushing a certain narrative? Well, if you ask the individual teachers, they can't answer you that. Because they don't know. They get told what to teach. Who tells them that? The government. So, in the Western world, especially in Europe, most governments are pro-socialism. They'll not tell you that. There's only a few parties who will outright tell you that. But they're all pushing for it. This is what I also find interesting, because certain parties in the Netherlands are considered right-wing. Why are they right-wing? Well, because they are not as left as the other lefties. And yes, indeed, such as 6-year-old kids in primary school being taught to touch themselves. How this is important, how this is useful, is beyond me. I think you're sick. I've seen how you dress. No, I'm not sick. I'm just a little bit allergic. No, but Richard is correct. Stuff like that is happening. I remember, I think it was from, well, I know in the UK, but also in Australia, they're talking about what's it called? Safe school, where the LGBTQ narrative is actually pushed upon children. In America, they have had court cases talking about whether kids should be allowed to transition from male to female or female to male. But they're kids. They're not even through puberty yet. But if we give them hormone blockers, then it would make the transition easier for them when they get older. Well, wait a second. We're talking about how we don't feed hormones to cattle that we slaughter to eat because it's unhealthy for us, but we're perfectly alright to push stuff like that in kids. It's not everywhere in the world, as far as I know, John. But yeah, Alicia does talk about it quite often, and she's right to do so. Indeed, Michael Keller, a 6-year-old hasn't even started puberty. I mean, we know that between the age of, I think I said this last time, between 4 and 7, they are basically in their first self-identifying phase. You go through it several times in your life, but several times before even going into puberty. Can you imagine when a parent uses that phase against you? Well, you're questioning on who you are, therefore I tell you you are this. This is not how children develop their identity. And if you then have parents that will actually prevent you from developing your identity by telling you what identity you have, my God, the damage they're doing is absolutely monstrous. And I mean, we've all heard about the woman in Texas suing her ex-husband because she wants to transition her boy to a girl, and the boy himself doesn't seem to want that, and the father definitely doesn't seem to want that. Well, the worst thing of that whole story is that the mother is actually a pediatrician. You'd think someone like that would know better. But it seems that the social sciences are more than merely corrupted. And the damage they are doing, because it fits the narrative, is amazing. They are willing to sacrifice their own children to fit the narrative. I didn't make a Mordheim stream yet. I might still do it. I don't know. I haven't played Mordheim for a while. But back to the topic, fitting and creating a narrative over the reality. The narrative, for example, in Europe was that no, we needed to take in as many victims of Syria and Afghanistan and Iraq, etc., 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 into Europe because, well, we need the people, and these people are all doctors and they're good behaved people and they will make our society safer. But then every story that proves that this is not the case has to be silenced, pushed away. So much so that when the daughter of a European Europarliamentarian got raped and murdered by one of these additions to our society, somehow that had to be silenced. The politician who lost, I think it was a man actually, who lost his own daughter, tried his best to say, but it's not because he was a refugee. Well, maybe it's not because he was a refugee, but let's be honest, if he wouldn't have been there, she would have been alive. But sacrificing your own daughter to the narrative is preferable than standing up, because if you stand up, you might be called an ist or an oob. And well, you can't live with that, not in our current day and age, because there is nothing worse than hate speech. Now, for myself, I can't imagine you being okay with someone damaging anything of mine, let alone killing. Oh, for everyone's attention, Alicia is on the Dark Conservatarians channel tomorrow night between 11 o'clock Central European time. Yes, indeed, Davey. There was a woman in France who got raped. There was a story in Sweden of the same ilk. They got raped by a refugee, but they didn't want to call the person a refugee. The one in Sweden was even worse because they actually tried to arrest someone, and the guy they arrested was a Swedish man, a native, who had never seen the woman, and the woman didn't initially say, no, it wasn't him. She merely said, I can't remember. So that man had to bend backwards to prove his innocence, and in the end he was able to do so, and in the end she was like, oh yeah, well, maybe it was indeed this or that. But yeah, it's the madness of pushing a narrative, so much so that they even destroy what they have, put themselves away as second class. What was that with Bering? I don't know. Anyone knows? But if we look at what's happening in Europe now, I mean, we even have Angela Merkel, who has herself said that the idea of the multicultural society was a disaster and it failed. Yet at the same time, she keeps pushing for multiculturalism because it's so good for them. The whole Modwin family's sick. I guess so. Yes, indeed. Me and my wife are both coughing. That is true. Unfortunate, but true. Sweden's polls are looking a little more hopeful now. Well, let's be honest. If we look at Sweden, they went full socialism about 50 years ago, and then they recognized that it was completely destroying their country, so they destroyed their socialistic system. But they seem to be going back to it, because when it comes to socialism, lessons are never learned. I don't know why that is. And I'm afraid you might be correct. Angela Merkel may have said that multiculturalism has failed only to get the voters that are against multiculturalism. But I think the average voter is a little bit smarter than that. After all, she's kind of the... let me put it like this. I've never heard of a politician being voted into power and then basically tells everyone around her to demolish or push away the flags of the country that you came a powerful political leader for. But that's what Angela Merkel did. We've just had our first successful conviction for female genital mutilation here in Ireland, committed by African Muslims. We are told, if we point out this is prevalent in Islam, it is Islamophobic and soon criminal hate speech. And there you have it, Renovatio. And yeah, I do think Germans do have more of a memory than goldfish do. But yeah. What name? Whose name? What? A dark conservatarian. Anyway, it is funny if, for example, you're not to mention that certain crime comes from certain groups. Funny enough, this doesn't mean that everyone from a certain group is a criminal. It does, however, mean that certain crimes does come from certain groups. And let's be honest, in the last, let's say, 5 years that we've let in a huge amount of refugees from the Middle East, we let in a huge amount of terrorists from the Middle East. But you're not to mention that. Hell, London was shook yesterday by a stab incident by a guy who, for fuck's sake, was already convicted once for terrorism. He should have still been in jail. They let him out because they didn't want to be racist, I guess. And this is how you get thanked. Personally, I'm going to say if someone is being convicted for terror-related crimes, terrorism, planned terrorism, you sincerely need to ask yourself whether you can indeed ever let them regain in normal society. Now, I'm not in favor of life imprisonment willy-nilly, but in all fairness, prison is not just meant to punish you for an act that you shouldn't have done. It's also to protect the rest of population of your country from said criminal. In actual fact, I'm against government-sanctioned murder. Is the expression bloody Germans hate speech, as I'm liable to use it? Well, probably not, funny enough, because Germans are still white, your best bet is not to say they're all Nazis, because that might be wrong. And yes, well, the funny thing about the guy in The Hague, he was an Afghan, and he clearly stated why he did it. He clearly stated he did it because of his religion, and the first communique from the courts was that he was mentally unstable, and that's why he did it. And this is how far our politicians and our ruling classes force us to believe a lie. In England, it's never a Muslim, it's an Asian guy. In the Netherlands, it's never because he's a Muslim, it's always because of a mental disability. It doesn't fit the narrative to say the truth. Well, yes, you are a grammar Nazi, John. How do we do maple syrup shots? Okay. I'm trying to follow in the chat at the same time because yeah. That's how it happened before now. Witch burnings, excommunication, perfect. Well, funny enough, if we look at what's happening now, the way that Antifa is causing violence in America, we saw this in Italy, we saw this in Germany, and it caused a lot of bloodshed. Simple as simple. Are we seeing the same happening now? Well, in all fairness, we've seen a year-long riot, more or less a year-long riot, in France with the yellow vests. It hasn't diminished. I mean, we hear less of it in the news, but it hasn't diminished. Yeah, you're right, Davey. Maybe I shouldn't follow chat too much. If we look at England, there has been no letting up on the whole Remain Brexit bullshit. I mean, Remainers keep telling everyone that the majority wanted to remain, whereas I've already seen so many Remainers say, you know what, I voted Remain, but can we please get out now because this is taking too long? And you're not hearing those stories a lot. Why don't you hear them? Well, because it doesn't fit the narrative. The narrative is globalism. The narrative is socialism is good. The narrative is the world is dying and we've only got 10 more years to live. The narrative is polar bears are dying. Yet in all these stories, the narrative and reality are very different. The truth and their story are very different. But you're not to point them out on their lies. Hell, even if you do, I've had a funny, well, not funny, but I had a bit of a discussion on the Twitter about global warming. But the science is settled. Okay, first off, science is hardly ever settled. Secondly, how is the science settled? How is CO2 causing warming? Sorry, hiccup. How is CO2 causing for warming? Well, because they say so. You know, but what does CO2 do to cause warming? Well, it's in the atmosphere and therefore heat can't escape. Why can't heat escape because of the CO2? What is CO2 actually doing to prevent that from happening? Well, but the science is settled. Yeah, but that's not an answer. Well, polar bears are dying. That's not true. Diversity is our strength. Where I agree that it doesn't have to be a problem, it is not our strength. It can be, but at this point in time, it's far more damaging than it's empowering. But it's not about ethnicity, because let's be honest, I'd rather have a black person I agree with than a white Antifa person next to me. And are there black people I agree with and that agree with me? Yeah, of course there are. But that doesn't matter. And yes, Michael, eventually everything that lives dies. I talk to my father often, who watches the BBC. He has no clue what is happening in France, Spain and Hong Kong. But there you have it. All these huge issues going on right now. But we're not talking about it. Why aren't we talking about it? Because it doesn't fit the narrative. Hell, no one likes to admit that what China is doing is dreadful. Well, okay, what China is doing is dreadful. How come Hollywood is bending backwards to placate to Chinese laws? Well, because they want to make money in China. Okay. But at the same time, they're pushing a narrative in the Western world, and they're removing that narrative from their Chinese publications. It's a divide and conquer tactic being played against us. And when I say against us, I don't mean against white people. I mean against Western people. Can a black person be a Western person? Yeah, sure they can. But the one thing they can't be is identitarians. They can't say, oh, I identify with this group, therefore these rules apply to me. Because the more you do that, the further away you get from a merit-based society, which basically is what Western society is. Well, it is fun to shitpost on the Twitter, but yeah, if you say one thing, all of a sudden they all come out, because the funny thing is they can never act alone. Yeah, that's a bit of a problem, mate, because I'm alone here. I can't tell you what you don't know. And I'm kind of stuck in So okay, let's go somewhere else. What can we do to help change the narrative? Well, we can only keep asking people. Why? What? And yes, their reactions are quite often Pavlovian. Oh, I had a talk today and someone's basically said, yeah, but a lot of right-wing people, blah, 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 blah. And you are, blah, 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 right-wing. And I'm okay, so am I right-wing? Well, that's not what I said. It's literally what you said. I can't tell you what you don't know. Well, yeah, there are plenty of reactionaries like that. Well, no, well, you should know this. This is a fact. No, okay, well, if it's a fact, how come people can't tell you about this fact? It's kind of funny, because there's a flat earther that I'm not really following him, but I watch his videos from time to time, and he once made one remark, and I think that's it's a very good remark. He doesn't believe the Earth is a globe. And why doesn't he believe the Earth is a globe? Because the average person can't explain how you can verify the Earth is a globe, other than the internet or because people say so. And to me that was a very good point. So I read up on how you can calculate the circumference of the Earth. It's an interesting bit of kit. It's a lot of math. I'll not pretend that I can do it easily, but I know how it's done. So I get back to him and say, okay, so this is how it's done. Yeah, but that's not what I want to hear. Yeah, okay, fair enough. You wanted proof. No, I don't. I want you to know what you're talking about. And I'm okay, fair enough. This is what I'm talking about. This is what I can prove. What I can prove. Because these are the facts. But then all of a sudden facts aren't interesting anymore. But this is one of the people that made me start thinking about, okay, why is what? 2 sticks, 2 people, 2 phones. And a long distance apart. Yep. Just fail it, you heathen. There is a basic proof you can perform that the Earth is a globe. Well, you can call someone on the other side of the world. True that, whether the Earth is flat or round doesn't matter. But when we're talking about the environment, for example, well, environmentalists want to change just about everything about our society. But the way they want to change it, to me, is beyond stupid. Because they want more solar panels and more wind power. Now, I've always been a little bit of a fan when it comes to wind power. But it's not reliable. Solar power even less so. Well, how come you say it's not reliable? Well, because you don't know how much wind there will be. Sorry, these people are just... do you want me to come on Modway? Not that I'm in tune with the current topic. Well, actually, in all fairness, John, I think I'm going to call it quits in a moment. So I'm not going to make it a lot longer. So I can go to bed at a reasonably godly hour. And yes, you can see the curvature on the horizon. That's true. But you can also... and a lunar eclipse doesn't prove the Earth is round, though, does it? It proves the moon is. I used my dad's sailing boat, not a borrowed one, okay. Hi there, Anxious. That's alright, Anxious. Oh, by the way, people, next week, Anxious Aussie will be on time because we will be doing a rune hangout. Right, Anxious? But yeah, back to the climate. I mean, more people have died from wind power than from nuclear power. And that's a very inconvenient truth, but it is still true. Even with all those nuclear disasters, wind power has caused more death. Ooh, there's a fire close to Anxious. I hope everything's alright then. Well, yeah, but Davey, you're correct in saying that it shows the shadow of the Earth, but it doesn't show that the Earth is a globe. It merely shows that it's flat and round, like a coin. I mean, that would then also mean that maybe one day we will have a stripe shadow, but on average... See, I'm so busy with this chat at the moment that I've totally forgotten what I want to say. When you sail, buildings as other ships sink behind the horizon. They don't get infinitely small. No, and actually, at a certain point in time, it goes quite fast because light itself is also drawn to the ground. It's also captured by gravity. Not literally like that, but yeah. The world will still be here when you wake up in my today. Right. But yeah, no, I mean, there's so many things that we know to be true. And yes, I do need more guests. Well, in all fairness, I have been rather busy lately with, nothing much important. But I'm going to try to get more guests, but I'm not too good at this. But I'm sorry, John, you're more than welcome, obviously, but I'm going to call it quits in a moment anyway, because old man and all that. I just want to make sure, Anxious, are you going to be on time next week? Well, we get at least one more Saturday. It's like Terry Pratchett once wrote down: if we don't do this, the world as we know it will come to an end. Or rather, he said, the sun won't rise. Well, there will be a glowing ball of gas, but it won't be the sun. Mrs. Alleron is shy tonight. No, she's watching a show, actually. Not this one, by the way, but... Anyway, I am rambling on. Hi there, Nick. Thank you, Renovatio. I will try to have things a little bit more streamlined soonish. And thank you all for joining us. I hope to see you all next Wednesday, and I definitely hope to see you all next Saturday when Anxious Aussie and me will do a stream about the runes. And until that time, I hope you guys have a great time, and see you all Wednesday. Bye bye.